Hello, welcome to week 1 of Sustainable Energy this year. This week's topic is sustainability and what is sustainable energy. And we're going to cover the following topics this week. So firstly, we're going to introduce the energy system. That's going to be this video. Briefly take you through the main fossil fuels, sources of renewable energy and what are primary and secondary energy. And then in other videos that I'll upload, we will cover sustainability itself as a concept, the 3 pillars of sustainability: environment, society, the economy, and how energy fits into that. There are some obvious ways and non-obvious ways. Third topic is then energy transitions, why we as a society over a very long time period have transitioned from one fuel to the other and what might be in store in the future. And finally, sort of a toolbox lecture on energy units and conversions. So that would be how we convert from one type of energy unit to the other, and the basic principles of energy conversion. So first, in this first lecture, introducing the energy system. Now I start by doing a quick video from YouTube on what are fossil fuels.
Fossil fuels. Fossil fuel is a term used to describe a group of energy sources that were formed from ancient plants and organisms during the Carboniferous period approximately 360 to 286 million years ago, even before the age of dinosaurs. At that time, the land was covered with swamps filled with organisms and plants. As they died, they sank to the bottom of swamps and oceans and over millions of years started decomposing under layers of sand, clay, and other minerals. Different types of fossil fuels formed depending on the combination of organic matter, temperature, time, and pressure conditions while decomposing. There are 3 major types of fossil fuels: coal, oil, and natural gas. Coal was formed from ferns, plants, and trees, which hardened due to pressure and heat. Oil was formed from small organisms like zooplankton and algae, where pressure caused the more complex organic matter to decompose. Natural gas was formed by the same process as oil, only it was exposed to more heat and pressure, causing it to further decompose and turn into a gaseous form. Fossil fuels are sought-after energy sources because they have a high energy density. They are the world's dominant energy source. Fossil fuels have a variety of applications from electricity production to transport fuels. They can also be used to make a variety of common products, from plastics to cosmetics to even some medicines. These resources have powered industrialization over history and continue to do so today. Fossil fuels can be an abundant and cheap, or in some cases, a scarce and expensive form of energy, depending on geographic location. For this reason, geopolitical issues arise due to scarcity caused by the natural geographic allocation of these highly valuable resources. Fossil fuels are considered non-renewable resources because they take millions of years to form, which means that once they are used, the resources will not be replenished in a human lifetime. The gradual depletion of the most accessible fossil fuel reserves have forced companies to develop technologies for extracting more challenging or unconventional reserves. In many cases, this means additional safety and environmental concerns as well as higher costs. Fossil fuels are also the largest emitters of carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas which causes climate change. In addition, their production causes both environmental and human health issues. These concerns have triggered society to look at alternate sources of energy that are more environmentally sustainable and renewable. That's fossil fuels.
So now we take a quick tour through all these fossil fuels that were mentioned. First of all, oil and gas, as mentioned, have the same origin. Oil and gas come from plankton, from plant and animal plankton, basically decaying microscopic marine life that was that sank to the ocean floor millions of years ago. So when the plankton died, it formed this organic mush on the seabed, and when there are anaerobic conditions where there is no oxygen, no other animal life could feed on the plankton, and then that mush accumulates. So when no other animals can feed on that. So when that sediment contains more than 5% of organic matter, it's called black shale, and this is the fundamental precursor to hydrocarbon reserves. So as black shale is buried under more and more layers as time goes on, it heats. With pressure there's heat, and then the depth and hence the temperature of heating determines if it ultimately becomes kerogen. So after black shale there becomes kerogen if there's enough depth and enough pressure. So this kerogen then gets buried even further below the ocean floor. When it becomes 1-2 kilometers buried beneath the ocean floor, it gets heated to 30-60 degrees, and then that becomes oil shale deposits. At around 90 degrees Celsius it turns to the liquid state, which is what we call oil, and at around 150 degrees Celsius, or about 5 kilometers below the sea depth, it becomes gas. And a rock that has produced oil and gas in this way is known as source rock. That's the last stage of this process. The last stage of the process is oil and gas permeating up through rock to form reservoirs. Some rocks are permeable, and these permeable rocks allow the oil and gas to bubble upwards. They're lighter than water. And then when they hit an impermeable rock, like this band here, they create hydrocarbon reservoirs. And this is where you might want to dig if you were into that kind of thing. We'll see later on in the course that there's there's enough oil and gas reserves. There's no need to dig for more. And we can use seismic surveys to locate these likely reservoirs based on what is permeable and impermeable rock. These dome-like structures are a good indication that there are oil and gas reserves. So moving on, coal and peat. Coal was mentioned as the third type of fossil fuel in the video that we saw, but peat is actually a type of coal. Peat is another fossil fuel which is common in Ireland but not so common in the rest of the world. So unlike oil and gas, coal is not formed from marine organisms but from the remains of actual land plants. So they're ideally formed in swampy settings with this lush vegetation growth and water to create these anaerobic conditions. So these are the first stages of peat and coal formation. Fallen trees, dead leaves, plant debris. So if you've ever been to a bog in Ireland, you kind of know what that feels like. There's a lots of water, and the plants grow, and then they go underwater, and then they're not decomposed. They actually form. They last, and they don't. They keep the carbon reserves. So again, the process works best under these anaerobic conditions without oxygen, since the reaction with oxygen during decay actually destroys the organic matter that would release carbon as CH4, methane. And the greater the carbon to oxygen ratio, the more carbon, the less oxygen, the harder the coal, and the more potential energy it contains, the more energy dense it is. So peat is an accumulation of partially decayed vegetation matter, and it's the first stages in formation of coal. Peat is formed in these wetlands. They're also known as bogs, peatlands, mires, moors, and it contains a large amount of water. So if you squeeze it, water comes out, and it has to be dried before use. That makes it very inefficient and labour intensive, space intensive. So the peatland ecosystem is also a very efficient carbon sink. It's one of the most efficient carbon sinks on the planet. So when we dig it up, we're not just combusting carbon, we're removing an ecosystem that sucks carbon out of the atmosphere. Historically, peat has been used as a very significant source of heat, but it burns with a very long flame, a dirty flame with a lot of smoke. It's very polluting, and it's carbon intensive. So carbon intensity is the amount of carbon dioxide it releases for the same amount of heat or energy, and the carbon intensity is twice that much as gas. So to get the same amount of heat out of peat, you get twice as much carbon. Peat is not considered a renewable energy. We'll get onto what that means in a second, but peat only grows at about 1 millimeter per year. So when you're talking about, peat open peat harvesting, stripping off meters a year, you're stripping off millennia and millennia of the growth of this fuel. Peat in Ireland is used for two main purposes. First of all, electricity generation. In 2018, about 13% of our electricity was from peat. That was down from about 20% in 1990 and 40% in 1960. And actually, Bord na Móna has committed to phasing out peat harvesting and and production of electricity by peat. So that's a very significant step for our climate ambitions. But peat is also used in homes. I'm sure many of you have open fires or stoves at home, and there are peat briquettes, which are kind of dried processed peat used to heat homes. About 80,000 homes in Ireland's last census used peat, and this is really the most significant thing to phase out for our climate targets. So as I said, peat is basically young coal, but when you add more pressure, more heat, when peat goes below the layer of the earth and it's rock covers it, and there's pressure and heat, coal forms, and the first stage of coal formation is known as lignite or brown coal. So lignite is the next step in the formation of coal, and it's when peat is subjected to vertical pressure from accumulating sediments. So it's the lowest rank of coal, and it's used almost exclusively as fuel in power generation. It's quite inefficient to transport because it has a lot of water, a high moisture content, and low energy density, and it's often burnt in power stations close to mines. It would be quite popular in Germany, for example. The second step then in coal formation is bituminous coal. Again, more pressure. It has a higher grade than lignite, but not as much as anthracite. Anthracite forms during the final stage of coal formation. It's valuable, it's high grade, it has a high carbon content, and it burns more efficiently with less smoke. Anthracite is often used as a domestic fuel for heating because it's more efficient to transport. It uses less space for a given amount of energy, and the pollution is lower. So anthracite produces twice the energy of lignite for the same amount of, for the same weight. Next broad category of fuel sources are renewable energy, and many people think when they take this module in sustainable energy that it's about renewable energy, and I'll describe later why that's a little bit misguided. So the definition of renewables is energy that is from a source that is not depleted when it's used. So the first category of renewable energy that most people think of is energy which primarily comes from the wind, from the sun, or from water. So that's from hydro, say from hydro dams, from waves, or from tidal energy. And most of those actually originally come from the sun, from the weather, because the sun creates wind through convection in the climate. That wind creates waves. Tidal energy there is, I suppose, gravitational energy because of the moon's impact on the Earth's gravitation. But these are primary renewable sources which produce electricity. A second category then is biomass energy. That's energy derived from organic matter, like wood, trees is the obvious one, or else crops. You can use crops like sunflowers to directly create oil, or waste, agricultural waste, domestic waste, things like that. And biomass can be used to generate different types of final energy uses. So it can be used directly for heat, burn a lump of wood in a fire. Biomass is also increasingly being used for power generation, so burning wood in power plants instead of coal. And it can also be converted into a liquid or gaseous fuel, which can substitute for oil or gas. So we can use bioliquids or biogas to replace transport fuels like petrol or diesel, or it can even be injected into the gas grid to substitute for natural gas in the gas grid. A third form of primary renewable energy source is renewable heat, and that largely takes two forms. First of all is geothermal. The word geo is in the ground, thermal heat. That is heat that comes from the Earth's core. So you can drill down quite deep and actually extract heat from the Earth's core. And the second form there is heat pumps. Heat pumps are a form of technology used more and more in houses, which extract ambient heat from the air, from the water, or from the earth. And that brings us to what is the energy system which I referred to. And the energy system can be defined as all components related to production, conversion, delivery, and use of energy within a country or a region or even the world. So we talked about primary energy sources, fossil fuels, renewables. Those form the start of the energy system and primary energy resources. Here they constitute coal, oil, gas and peat, which are fossil fuels. They're also non-renewable. They don't, once we use them, they're gone. They don't come back. Solar, wind, biomass, geothermal, water, hydro and tidal, renewable. They're non-exhaustible. Nuclear is somewhere in the middle because uranium is depleted but at a very, very slow rate, so it's somewhere between renewable and non-renewable, or it's contested. Nuclear is not a fossil fuel as well. So these are kind of primary energy sources found in nature, and we need to transform these into usable energy sources. And usable energy is also known as energy carriers or secondary energy. Some people even call this final energy, and these include electricity, petrol, diesel, kerosene. These are refined fuels, refined oils, biodiesel, ethanol, and wood pellets. These are biofuels, so they've been converted from biomass into biofuels. Hydrogen is an energy carrier or a usable energy, and same with district heat. So these are all forms of energy which we can directly use for the things that we need. What are these things that we need? We call them energy services. We don't actually need any kind of energy. What we need is energy services. That's why we call energy a derived demand. I don't care about, a litre of petrol. I care about getting somewhere. I don't care about a kilowatt hour of electricity. I care about powering my laptop. So these energy services are the things that actual humanity and the economy need from energy. And there's three main categories there. First of all, heat. Obviously, we need space heating to keep warm, water heating and industrial boilers for different industrial purposes. Second category of energy services are transport energy. So cars, trucks, ships, planes, even bikes. That can be categorized into passenger or freight or goods transport. And then the third is what is really electricity. So these are different services that require electricity to be powered. And as we move from this left-hand side to the right-hand side of this system, there is always some form of conversion and transport. If you've done any kind of basic physics, you'll know that when you convert energy from one form to the other, there are typically losses. So there are losses in terms of heat losses when we combust something. So primary energy is this energy that's been formed in nature and not been subject to any engineered conversion process. It's energy contained in these raw fuels and other forms of energy received as an input to the system. So these raw fuels are the input to the energy system. Secondary energy, or this usable energy, are these convenient sources of energy which have been converted and which we can use for the energy services that we need. What is the sort of picture? This is a snapshot of the world's energy system in terms of energy flows. Quality is not great there, but it gives you a sense that this is from the International Energy Agency in 2018. Shows you that from the left here, the width of the column of the flow denotes the amount of flow in the energy system. So we're mainly fueled by oil, coal and gas, and that oil mainly flows into transport energy. Coal then flows into power stations. A lot of power losses there from power stations, and that electricity goes to other and to industry, and then gas. And you can see there that biomass, waste, and renewables form a much smaller part of the picture. So we still are overwhelmingly fueled by fossil fuels. Next, I'm going to show you a video on the difference between primary and secondary energy.
IEA Toolkit video, Primary versus Secondary Energy. Primary energy commodities are captured directly from natural resources. Primary heat can be captured from natural sources such as nuclear fission, solar thermal collectors, or geothermal reservoirs. Primary electricity is obtained from sources such as hydro, wind, solar PV, tide and wave power, where the first practical measuring point of energy is electricity. For renewables, primary sources are those which can be extracted naturally, like solar, wind, hydro, tidal, wave, or fuel wood. Coal, mined directly from the ground, is a primary energy. This includes anthracite, coking coal, bituminous coal, subbituminous coal, and lignite. Oil, as a primary fuel, exists as crude oil, natural gas liquids, and other hydrocarbons. Natural gas is a primary fuel composed primarily of methane. Transformation changes the form of the energy. Secondary energy sources are obtained from transformation and are produced to respond to user needs when primary sources are not suitable. For example, could we use crude oil directly in cars or boilers? No, because crude oil has highly variable mixture of hydrocarbon molecules, so there is no universal engine for it. We need a transformation to turn it into usable products. Secondary fuels are obtained from primary fuels through the process of transformation. This diagram shows a basic commodity flow. Primary commodities undergo transformation and result in secondary commodities. Secondary electricity and heat are produced after transformation of another energy source, such as burning fossil fuel. This transformation can occur in a power plant, combined heat and power plant, or pure heat plant. As secondary renewable energy is charcoal, which is produced from fuel wood. Secondary coal includes both solid and gaseous fuels produced after transformation. Secondary coal products are then used in many industrial processes, such as steel manufacturing. Oil products are secondary fuels. Crude oil inputs into a refinery, which produces oil products, such as gasoline, residual fuel oil, heavy gas oil, diesel, kerosene, jet fuel, naphtha, butane, and lighter products. In this process, crude oil can be thought of as primary energy, while refined products are secondary. For more details on this and other key concepts of energy statistics, please go to our Energy Statistics Manual and the International Recommendation on Energy Statistics.
That recording comes from the IEA. So one last slide to summarize what we've been talking about in the energy system. Here is a classification of fuels. On the left and y-axis, there's primary and secondary. So on the left over there are fuels which are found in nature, which we have to convert to use. And on the right are secondary fuels, ones that we can use directly for the things that we need. At the top here are renewable fuels, things that will grow back quickly or don't deplete when we use them. And at the bottom are non-renewable fuels and sources. So for example here, electricity and hydrogen can both be primary. Electricity can be both primary and secondary, and it can come from renewable and non-renewable sources. Hydrogen is a secondary energy source. It's an energy carrier, and it can be also produced from renewable or non-renewable sources. These over here are non-renewable primary sources: crude oil, coal, peat, natural gas. Nuclear is seen as non-renewable, but it's not a fossil fuel either.